Matthew Bell here with Alzheimer'sProof.com, and today I'd like to talk about 13 alternative supplements and treatments for Alzheimer's disease. I want to stress that these are alternative treatments. My purpose in presenting this information is not so much to endorse any one particular strategy for treating Alzheimer's disease. It's rather just to disclose research leads that I found personally interesting and things that you and your family might be interested in pursuing as well. There are a number of people who are going to take the perspective that the only interventions that should be performed on a person with Alzheimer's disease or some other dementia are those treatments that are recommended by regular doctors, medications, pharmaceuticals, and the like of this. In another video, I will probably sketch the various pharmaceutical interventions that are available, and without diminishing that point of view, I would simply say not everybody shares it. I'm not going to take sides particularly. I mean, some people might think that me even talking about this is taking a side, but again, my purpose is simply informational. Couple of caveats. I am not a doctor. I am not a medical researcher. And again, I am not attempting here to treat or to diagnose any condition. I am simply giving you the overflow of some of the research that I've performed and some of the things that maybe I'm doing in my own life. So you can think of some of these as not simply treating an Alzheimer's patient, but for example, in my own life, I would want to try to avoid getting Alzheimer's in the first place. So you might just think of these as ways of enhancing your diet to try and stack the odds a little bit in your favor. And even if there's only a little bit of a benefit that you get from these, is it worth it if you can prevent Alzheimer's disease in your own life? So again, it's up to viewers, but without further ado, here's my list. So the very first entrant on this list, somewhat surprising to me initially when I first went through some of this material, it's actually broccoli. Now, broccoli is going to stand in for a whole slew of green leafy vegetables, but there are two things that I'd like to mention here. First is that broccoli contains something called sulforaphane. And this is kind of a forbidding term here, I realize, but sulforaphane is alleged to have certain beneficial properties. For example, it's supposed to be anti-inflammatory, it's supposed to be an antioxidant, and it's supposed to have detoxification properties. Most intriguingly, sulforaphane may even prevent the formation of Alzheimer's plaques and tangles, which are characteristic of the disease. At this point, I should interject that some of these treatments are going to make more sense in light of a basic understanding of some of the speculations regarding the causes for Alzheimer's disease. I've mapped those out in another video and won't get into them exhaustively here, but suffice it to say that there are people who think Alzheimer's disease may have to do with brain inflammation, with oxidation, with exposure to toxins and the like of this. So each of these properties is somewhat interesting. Additionally, Alzheimer's is indisputably bound up with the creation in the brain of various junk or gunk, which you might say protein deposits, which are referred to as plaques and tangles. And so I'm going to be talking more about those. And again, for more information on this, I invite you to find my written work at Alzheimer'sProof.com, or click on one of the other videos where I get more in depth in the causes, speculations. Now let me, in passing with broccoli, mention something that's of historical interest, if nothing else, and that is that various herbalists and ancient physicians, including Galen, are often speaking about something that they refer to as the doctrine of signatures. And this is again, somewhat of a historical curiosity more than anything, but I thought that it would be fun to bring it in. And the doctrine of signatures basically goes like this: is if a vegetable or a plant or a food item resembles a part of the body, then that food item can be counted on to help support the health of that particular part of the body. So, you know, a kidney bean looks like a kidney, well then it must be good for kidneys. Now broccoli is interesting because it can kind of look like a little brain with a little brain stem, so it's interesting, but the doctrine of signatures, again, I bring it in mostly as a curiosity, because some people actually say, well, if you invert the little broccoli stalk, it's going to look like the lungs and the bronchial tubes. And so there's something of an art form there, but I do bring it in, and I'll actually mention it further along. Another interesting one is coconut oil. Coconut oil has received a fair amount of attention in some of the literature that I've read. There's actually two different trajectories that pertain to coconut oil. The first is as a detoxifier. So people engage sometimes in coconut oil pulling, where they'll swish it around in their mouth, and it's supposed to draw out toxins, I suppose, from the body. Another aspect of what coconut oil is supposed to do, though, is provide an alternative source of energy for the brain. So again, I defer to my video on causes, but one cause that actually that I didn't mention in that video, so it doesn't do you much good to go to the video for this, but one of the hypothesized causes for Alzheimer's is actually energy deficiency, that the brain doesn't have enough energy to run. And the brain primarily apparently uses glucose. Well, then the supposition is that Alzheimer's may develop out of an inability of the brain to utilize glucose. And if this is the case, it would be helpful to have an alternative source of energy. And so there is a bunch of researchers who actually are supposing that something called a ketone might actually service that ambition. That might be that ketones are able to provide this alternative source of energy. Okay, if you're still with me, coconut oil has something called a medium chain triglyceride, an MCT, and these MCTs are alleged to increase the level of ketones and thereby provide energy for the brain. So again, detox and energy for the brain, coconut oil, that's its supposed benefits. Number 3 is something called glutathione. Primarily, glutathione is going to be a potent antioxidant. And it's actually produced by the body, but like so many different chemicals and hormones and things, it decreases with age. And so some people have hypothesized that if Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia may be a result of oxidation in the brain, having a robust supply of antioxidants may help to stave the disease off or to even treat it. Glutathione is present in green leafy vegetables. So again, we go back to broccoli, kale, collard greens, other things like this are going to potentially boost the glutathione levels. And it's important to note that in all of these things, it's going to be important to support the body in terms of a healthy diet, which is primarily, I guess, what we're speaking of here, just kind of accentuating and bolstering diet, but also to have a good exercise program and to make sure that the person is engaged in healthy sleep patterns. Number 4 is green tea. Green tea is another antioxidant. It contains something called a polyphenol. I guess it contains several of these polyphenols, and they're alleged to have neuroprotective abilities. And this word neuroprotective sort of means what you would think it would mean, means that it has the ability to protect neurons in the brain. One of the most important of these polyphenols in green tea is something called epigallocatechin gallate, or EGCG. And this is supposed to have the effect of, again, protecting neurons, protecting against the death of these neural cells in the brain. So number 5, I'm going to talk about herbs. Now, I have spent considerable energy on the website, alzheimersproof.com, going into herbs at greater length. I have several different lists, one of which I think is like 25 top herbs, and I probably will do a video just on that. But for the time being, I thought I would select out 5 to highlight for special mention in this video. So just as a kind of an alert, there are far more herbs that can be mentioned, and I do mention them elsewhere. I'm going to kind of rank them here, but it's, you know, I'm simply providing these for informational purposes. It's not as though I can actually say these are in some special order. But number 5 in terms of herbs is going to be turmeric. Now, turmeric just shows up on so many different lists. It is a powerful anti-inflammatory, and again, as I said, there are researchers who think that Alzheimer's disease is the result of brain inflammation. Curry eaters, and turmeric is an important component of the Indian dish curry. Supposedly, curry eaters in India score higher on various mental state examinations than non-curry eaters. So the suggestion is that there may be some neuroprotective ability or cognitive enhancing ability to turmeric. The next one, number 4 here for herbs, is going to be saffron. Saffron is well known again on the spice rack. So just like turmeric might be in your kitchen, saffron, generally a little bit more expensive of an herb, but it has a reputation as a very important spice. And it is generally there. I think there's Spanish saffron, there is Iranian saffron. But saffron also has demonstrated in various experiments that have been done neuroprotective ability, memory enhancing ability. It's an antioxidant, it's an anti-inflammatory, and it may also inhibit the formation of plaques. Again, these amyloid protein deposits that conglomerate in the brain and disrupt neural activity. Number 3 for herbs is Magnolia. Magnolia is an anti-inflammatory and it also has neuroprotective effects. Magnolia also helps to regulate neurotransmitters in the brain, which are the chemicals that actually facilitate the exchange of electrical impulses between nerve cells. Number 2 for herbs is rosemary. Now, rosemary is an interesting one because it shows up. Actually, it's mentioned in the play Hamlet, and I like to mention this routinely because it's referenced in the play, Shakespeare's play Hamlet, as being for remembrance. And what's interesting is that it's had this reputation as a memory enhancer for many years. So I feel like, talking about herbs, some of the folk wisdom, it's well to at least mention it to audience members that rosemary has had this reputation. Some researchers suggest that it's extraordinarily potent at fighting Alzheimer's disease, so much so that it can even be effective, according to them, as aromatherapy. There's one gentleman, I think, who has started to make it into a shampoo so that it can actually be massaged into the scalp and possibly absorbed into the body. Again, I'm not taking a position on the efficacy of any of these particular methods, but I say that historically and in terms of folk wisdom, rosemary has been considered an herb that is able to augment and enhance and bolster memory. And so, again, I put it to viewers in the audience, if you want to research herbs, rosemary is one that you are going to want to take a look at. But the number 1 herb has got to be ginkgo, I think, because ginkgo biloba is very well regarded as an herb that has to do with cognitive function. It supposedly is able to increase blood flow to the brain. And one of the causes that I do deal with in the cause video is a reduction of oxygen to the brain. So a lack of oxygen that can be the result of a stroke or a mini stroke, a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, that can cut off the flow of oxygen and blood to the brain and actually cause the death of brain tissue. Ginkgo is supposed to be able to help with blood flow in the brain. But it actually also is supposed to be able to stimulate nerve cells in the brain, stimulate neurons, stimulate neural activity. Anecdotally, it's linked with increases in intelligence. How high? Again, I can't say. I'm not taking sides on that. None of these things are going to be magical. They're not supernatural. They're not going to undo years of poor diet and bad habits and the like of this, or exposure to toxins and poisons. But if you've got other things in place, you're living a healthy lifestyle, you're eating correctly, why not add in a little bit of ginkgo, and it may just give you that additional boost that you need to be healthier for longer. Interestingly enough, ginkgo is actually supposedly prescribed in Germany as a treatment for Alzheimer's disease, which is why I think it deserves this number 1 spot in terms of herbs. Now, whether it's prescribed in lieu of pharmaceuticals, I don't have that familiarity with Germany's healthcare system, but it is an interesting thing that there are some medical practitioners in the world who seem to regard it as extraordinarily promising for dementia of various kinds, including Alzheimer's. The next category is going to be hormones, so number 6 overall. Hormones are one of these things that decreases with age, right? So as we age, the hormones go down. I'm actually going to treat 2 different categories. The first category is going to be sex hormones. So things like estrogen, right? Estrogen is reputed to have neuroprotective effects. It's supposed to protect against the death of neurons. It's supposed to be anti-inflammatory. It's supposed to act as an antioxidant. And there are a number of people who do think that it is this reduction in the sex hormone levels that is associated with Alzheimer's. And it's clearly the case that age is a risk factor. I've got another video on the risk factors for Alzheimer's. Age is a risk factor. So it's not clear if this is a separate risk factor, but in any case, as we age, sex hormones go down, and so hormone replacement therapies and things like this are on the table in terms of some researchers when they're supposing how can we effectively treat Alzheimer's disease. Progesterone would be another hormone. Progesterone is alleged to be able to facilitate learning and memory. And for males, testosterone is going to be the important one. And testosterone, together with the APOE4 gene, and again, I talk more about this in other videos. I've written about it on alzheimersproof.com. When testosterone is reduced, with a person whose genetic profile includes this APOE4 gene, they find that the risk for developing plaques and tangles is elevated. So there's an increased risk with the genetic profile and with the reduction in testosterone. Other hormones, the primary one that I'll mention here is going to be melatonin. Once again, melatonin production in the body decreases with age. It is associated with healthy sleep patterns. The sleep patterns in Alzheimer's patients are often notoriously bad and sometimes completely non-existent or haphazard. And melatonin is supposed to have neuroprotective effects on its own. Number 7 is lithium. Lithium is one of these chemicals or one of these compounds that are actually acknowledged by mainstream medicine, at least to have some effect on brain chemistry, since lithium is prescribed for people who have bipolar disorder. And so I think this at least suggests that the medical community at large recognizes that lithium does have an impact on brain chemistry. Now, that's neither here nor there with respect to Alzheimer's. I simply submit it to say that not all of these things that I'm listing here, sometimes they do bump up against mainstream medicine in interesting ways. But lithium is supposed to be a neuroprotective agent. It may help to break up plaques and tangles. It can be found and gained in diet in things like coffee and dairy and eggs, some legumes, some seafoods. I've got a more complete list in my article on alzheimersproof.com. And the final thing I'll say about lithium, if you're interested in looking into it, is that lithium, like so many other things, calcium, magnesium, and so on, zinc, come in different forms. And so there is a difference in terms of how these are absorbed and the like of that. And I think researchers have compared, for example, lithium carbonate to lithium orotate, and the research that I have seen suggests that the lithium orotate variety can be taken in lesser amounts, has less problems with toxicity, and is, I guess, better absorbed than its carbonate counterpart. Number 8, marijuana, actually. Now, this is a hot button issue right now politically as I'm filming this, and I don't want to wade heavily into any political discussion here, but suffice it to say that cannabinoids, which are some of the active, I guess, psychotropic compounds in marijuana, cannabinoids are alleged to have neuroprotective effects. It's supposed to be anti-inflammatory. They're supposed to be potent antioxidants, and a lot of researchers are hopeful. There's a whole wave of people who are interested in CBD oils and the like of this. So I think certainly marijuana's use as an Alzheimer's treatment is on the table, and there are researchers investigating at present. Number 9 was a really interesting one to my way of thinking, because I just didn't expect it, and that is nicotine. Nicotine, this is an odd one because the researchers are quick to say we're not advocating that you start smoking or that you continue, because smoking itself has a deleterious effect on the health and lung tissue and the like of that, and that's been pretty well established, I think. But nicotine actually has, in research, administered through a patch now, has been shown to increase attention, focus, and has increased certain cognitive functions in people who have had dementias, including Alzheimer's disease. Number 10 is omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids, these things are going to be found in things like cod liver oil, krill oil, flaxseed oil, and the like of these. They're primarily anti-inflammatory, and they're alleged to be able to halt or even reverse cognitive decline that's associated with aging. And so I think many researchers are saying that we need to have these healthy fats in our diet. Now, I've written about this again on my website, and you want to make a very sharp and clear distinction between these sorts of fatty acids, these omega-3 variety fatty acids, and saturated fats and trans fats and the kinds of things that are almost uncontroversially bad, with fried foods and the like of these. Not going to get these good fats with those. So you want to be careful with the fats, and again, get good quality sources for these omega-3s. Number 11 is red wine, and particular red wine is supposed to have a compound in it called resveratrol. Resveratrol is supposed to be a neuroprotective, once again. It has an anti-aging reputation. So interestingly enough, it's supposed to have, it has a reputation of being able to sort of reverse the aging process. Once again, we're not dealing here with magical things, supernatural. It's just, again, this is associated with sometimes the Mediterranean diets and things like that, where fish and red wine are staples, and the people have fewer incidents of heart disease and other things like that. But resveratrol is also alleged to be able to break down the plaques and the tangles that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. Once again, now the same thing with nicotine. We got a caveat here, an asterisk, and that is obviously red wine should be imbibed in moderation. Resveratrol is available as a supplement without wine, but again, there's some debate about the standards with respect to some of these supplements, and those are all fair points. So if you're interested in red wine and resveratrol, research them. You'll find that generally speaking, red wines are favored over white wines, and dry wines are favored over sweet wines. For a list of wines that are supposed to be high in resveratrol content, I invite you to, again, check out my website, alzheimersproof.com. And once again, just be careful with the wines, and obviously all things in this regard in moderation. Number 12, vitamins. So there's actually 2 vitamins that stand out in the research, and one of the trajectories of thinking with respect to causes, and I get into this once again in the cause video, is that Alzheimer's disease may be the result of certain nutrient and nutritional deficiencies, and vitamins are one component of that. So one important mention would be vitamin B, the B complex, in particular vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 deficiency is associated with an elevated risk for various forms of dementia. Another is vitamin D, and once again, vitamin D is associated with a higher risk for, vitamin D deficiency, I should say, is associated with a higher risk for dementia and Alzheimer's. Vitamin D, by the way, is alleged to be an anti-inflammatory as well. It is produced by the body, but once again, as you age, your body's ability to produce it drops off severely. So just like hormones and some of the other things we've mentioned, they are available, glutathione, bioavailable by your own body chemistry, but as you age, these things drop off, and all of these together, or some of them severally, may be some of the contributing factors to Alzheimer's. The last one I'll talk about, number 13 here, is walnuts. And walnuts is going to bring us back to the doctrine of signatures that I mentioned with broccoli, because you'll find sources online that will compare the look of the walnut to a little brain case or a little brain. And it's just kind of interesting to think about the fact that some of these supplements and things like that may actually correspond to the body parts. Again, I'm not going to press that point very hard. I'm simply going to suggest that it's an interesting or a historical curiosity. But it's supposed to support healthy brain function, essentially. It's supposed to even regulate neurotransmitters and possibly break down plaques and tangles, like some of the other things that we've mentioned. And overall, walnuts are alleged to reduce a person's risk for various forms of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. So finally, I just want to reiterate that these supplements are not magical. I am not, in fact, endorsing any of these things. I'm mentioning them because I feel like they're interesting lines of research. They may be interesting and may be applicable. You might be able to give them to your loved one who has Alzheimer's disease. Let's say they like curry anyway. All right, well, a little bit more turmeric maybe in there. Maybe some green tea instead of some other beverage wouldn't hurt. And for my own well-being and my own diet, I can tell you that I'm trying to incorporate a number of these things into my own life Again, if it raises my odds of beating Alzheimer's or not contracting it or coming down with it or whatever verbiage you want to use, I feel like it's possibly worth it, but it will not counteract a lifetime of bad choices. So you have to have a good diet, good exercise, good sleeping patterns, and be in generally good health. Once again, my name is Matthew Bell. I thank you for joining me today. If you found something useful in this video, I invite you to like it, subscribe to the channel. I am going to add additional content. And if you want to really dive more in depth and see some of the sources that I've used, I have these outlined on alzheimersproof.com, and I invite you to check that website out as well. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.